Welcome back to Tiny Grimes Games, and today I want to ask the question, does FFG have a dead card game problem? And to be clear, this is not a video about how FFG is doing a bad job or the sky is falling. I just simply am asking a question. I'm going to wrestle with it myself, and I'm curious to hear what you out there think. Now, this question was spurred on by me the other day, looking around my office and seeing thousands upon thousands of cards of games that I once played and loved. And as I was looking around and reminiscing about how Netrunner had just been discontinued, I realized, wow, every single one of these games has been canceled, and I played them all recently and reminisce about how great they were and how much fun I had with them, and often think about like, oh, I wonder if I should get back into that game. And now I realize they're all dead, and that feels really weird to me. So, to be clear, in the last 3 years, or really 2.5, because we're still in 2018, well, I guess 3.5, we've had 5 card games by FFG killed. Maybe that's not the right way to say it. Finished their life cycle. That might be a more neutral way to say it. So this year, we have Netrunner ending. We have Star Wars, the card game, limping to its final end. It feels like that game was ended a long time ago, to be honest. 2016 was the shocking end of Conquest, and then in 2015 Game of Thrones was canceled, the first edition. All 4 of those games I played very competitively. Star Wars and Game of Thrones, I went to Worlds and played in, made cuts in World Championships, that kind of stuff. And then Call of Cthulhu was also limped to its conclusion in 2015, and that was another game. I never played it. Looked interesting, but I never played it. So essentially, in 3.5 years, we have 5 games discontinued, and currently they're in production on 4 card games, 5 if you count Star Wars Destiny. So, back to my question. If we have, in the last 3.5 years, 5 games getting discontinued, they're all littering my house, is there a dead card game problem or not? I don't know. I'm going to wrestle with that today. So, I guess my first question in all this is rotation. Rotation was supposed to be the answer and what was going to fix all the problems. And the theory was, we're too late into Game of Thrones 1.0. The rules have gotten all messed up and muddled. We're just going to reboot it, and we're not going to rotate, and we're going to move on. But don't worry, we've implemented it in our other games, such as Star Wars, such as Netrunner. Star Wars didn't work out. The player base was already really small by that point anyway. I don't think anything was saving it. Netrunner is a really interesting one. Not that long ago, the game was huge. It ran through a difficult period where the balance was off, but rotation was going to save everything. Rotation came in really late in the cycle and did nothing. Like, it just did nothing to save the game. And what makes this really interesting to me is I was just looking on the internet, and in 2016 there was this really interesting post where someone said, should I get into Netrunner? And all the Netrunner players said, of course. And the question was, Game of Thrones 1.0 just got discontinued. Is this going to happen in Netrunner? And they all said, no, of course not. It's a huge game. We're going to have rotation. This is going to be the game that goes forever because rotation will make this possible. But rotation did not. So in other words, rotation has failed for the 2 games that rotated. So I guess the question is, does rotation work for these LCGs? And I didn't think it would when they announced it, and I still don't think it will, because it's too late. You can't have like 4 years without rotation and before rotating. It needs to be something that's implemented sooner. But the question is that even enough, right? Because we talked about in an earlier video the typical life cycle of an FFG game, where it comes out wildly popular and then it diminishes in popularity as FFG releases more card games that cannibalize their player base. People get kind of tired of it and move on to the next game. And I was thinking about this, why does that happen so much, that the first year is so exciting and then less exciting? And I realized with FFG's model of the LCG, which means releasing a small amount of cards, they're able to generate a ton of excitement and hype based on the mechanics of the game. And the game's always kind of bad because the card pool's not robust enough, but there's always this thought of like, the mechanics are exciting, the IP is exciting, I love Star Wars. When they release more cards, ... it's going to be fun, or this problem will be fixed. And inevitably, that doesn't happen. The release is so drippy and slow, it's hard for them to put out enough cards. And then when they do, people inevitably are not satisfied. Whatever their problem was, they tend not to be satisfied, and then they leave. So it's this really interesting dichotomy of, is it FFG cannibalizing their own player base? Is it this slow drip of cards making people not realize exactly what the game is until, you know, it's already a year in? I don't know exactly, but I think that's an interesting question. One of the biggest questions I have in this is, if you look at these dates, you have, say, Netrunner 2012 to 2018, so that's about a 7-year run. Same thing with Star Wars. So my question is this: is 7 years enough for a product, for a card game like this? Or do we look at 7 years and go, that's not adequate? I feel wronged somehow that it only has a 7-year run. For me personally, I have never played an FFG game from start to finish. I got in ground floor of Star Wars LCG, but I only played about a year and a half before what I talked about happened. The card pool, as it became rounder, I realized that this game, I just don't think it's a high quality game. Like, there's tons of stuff I like about it, but as a fun game, I think it's great. As a high level world caliber competitive game, I just didn't feel like it was there. I have heard that as the card pool became even bigger, it did make it there, but not when I was playing. Netrunner, I liked, but I got in really late. I tried it early and really didn't like it. I thought the card pool wasn't deep enough for the very beginning. And then I got just involved in Star Wars and Game of Thrones, and then by the time I got back to it, it was already falling off the cliff. Game of Thrones 1.0, I really loved. And then the card pool got too big and too messy, and the rules got too chaotic. And that's, you know, about when they announced that they were going to reboot it. I had just gotten out. So that one is probably the closest I played to the end. But so for me personally, this actually isn't an issue, apparently. Like, when I think about it, I go, 7 years, that's not enough. And then when I actually think about it, I'm like, geez, 7 years to play one card game? That's just not apparently how I am. I like to think that's how I am, but apparently it's not. So I guess my question to you out there is 7 years enough? Or are we just spoiled by, you know, stuff like Magic and Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh! That have been going for all eternity? There aren't that many games like that, right? Games die all the time. So while I may look around my personal house and go, oh my goodness, FFG's had 5 dead games in 3 years? That's absurd. I can't even think of 5 dead games total in the last 3 years outside of FFG. I'm sure there's hundreds, just not games I played. I played Doomtown, that died, but that's about the only one. Okay, so that's the question. Is 7 years enough, or is it kind of exploitative, right? To say like, sure, buy all these cards, wink, wink, we know it's going to end in 7 years. To me, the biggest problem with this is, as we got to about the 6-year point with Netrunner, they rebooted it, like a soft reboot. So they didn't completely remake the game, but they rebooted internally, made a whole bunch of money off these new core sets that people wouldn't have bought otherwise, right? They hadn't rebooted it, and then instantly canceled it like 6 months to a year later. Now, we don't know the inner workings of this. There's rumors of maybe Wizards of the Coast just suddenly pulled away the rights to it. I don't think that's how these work, though. You negotiate this pretty far in advance. The way I view it is, FFG probably said, we're going to reboot this, see how it goes. If it's successful and worth the money, then we will indeed renew it. If it's not, we won't. And then they didn't. That's my guess. I don't know. Total speculation there. But so I guess the question is something like that rubbed me the wrong way, that right near the end of the life cycle, they went ahead and rebooted, and that kind of bugs me. It kind of bugs me that they do that. So what do you think? Is it exploitative to say, we're just going to keep making new games, they're going to last about 7 years, know that going in, and that's just how it works? Or is it even possible that this data is just wrong, and it's just data, right? And that while the data in the past is true, it doesn't reflect the future. And the FFG has been constantly learning and getting more nuanced and understanding how to keep a game alive. We all kind of thought that with the rotation coming in, and then it didn't work, which really has me worried that their great grand solution for keeping these games alive did not work at all. So my question is, FFG, what's next? Do you have another solution, or do you just make so much money making a game for 7 years, canceling it, and making a new one that you're fine with it? All right, so here's a couple concerns I have, or questions. If you're a Lord of the Rings player, your game is in its 8th year, are you worried? I know I would be. If I had a lot of money tied up in Lord of the Rings, and I could make a trade or a sale, it feels to me like this is when you dump Lord of the Rings. You look around and you go, oh, they can't be making a lot of money off this game anymore. You know this is a big IP. They could easily reboot this game in some other fashion. They've got Call of Cthulhu. That's a one-player game that kind of replaces this game. I'm going to predict by the time of Gen Con next year, they will have announced that Lord of the Rings is done. That's my big prediction, just based on past data. I do not have sales records. I'm just guessing. I don't know anyone who plays Lord of the Rings anymore. I feel like those players moved to Call of Cthulhu. It will be announced to be ceasing production by the end of Gen Con next year is my guess. The other thing is, let's say you're a Game of Thrones 2.0 player. I feel like that game just came out. But you know what? It's in its 4th year. That means it's over halfway done. Are we really halfway done with Game of Thrones 2.0 that feels like it just came out? I don't know. I feel like we're reaching this point with that card pool. By the way, don't play the game. But I've noticed they're having a lot of hiccups right now of these weird combo decks kind of coming out of nowhere and dominating and having to restrict. And that's totally fine. Restricted list is there for a reason. It's to fix these problems. Every card game goes through these moments where, oops, sorry, we thought that was going to work out. It didn't. So that's fine. But is this that point where Game of Thrones 2.0 is going from the card pools being too small to it's getting robust enough now that stuff is leaking through, and maybe now it's time to do a rotation? I don't know. I don't have the answer. I don't play Game of Thrones 2.0 enough to be able to make claims about rotation, but if I was a Game of Thrones 2.0 player, I would be rallying the community and thinking, geez, is our game really halfway to being dead and being discontinued and becoming 3.0 or something else? Especially thinking that the HBO show is coming to an end. Does that mean interest in this IP is going to wane? I don't know. I would be a little worried, though, and be thinking, what can we do as a community to help put some pressure on FFG to keep this alive and really deal with this reality that it may be halfway over? All right, so I guess here's my final question today. Does all of this information, does the graveyard of dead games that is my office make you trepidatious at all, a little nervous to pick up new FFG products? For me, not really. I'm pretty good at looking at my past track record and making accurate assessments of myself. Apparently, I'm not the kind of guy who plays the game for 7 years. So what I wouldn't do, though, for me personally, is pick up Game of Thrones 2.0 today. Like, if I had never played it before, I wouldn't just jump in today unless I wanted to just play a game for a couple of years. But for me, having a game go for 7 years is fine. That's enough. But I think the big question is Star Wars Destiny. Star Wars Destiny is having a quick rotation. So my question is, will this quick rotation keep the game alive longer? Will it allow its unlimited format to retain value in its cards, to be playable, and will that allow the game to extend its life cycle dramatically? I don't know. We're really early into the Destiny life cycle, so I feel like this whole talk is sort of irrelevant for that, but I'm just curious. So a couple questions for you. What do you make of this question? Does FFG have a dead card game problem? And number two, does it make you less interested or less likely to buy FFG products? I'm very curious to know. Again, this is not a Sky is Falling video. This is merely an observation followed by a question. Like and subscribe. I'll see you next time on Tiny Grams Games.